Hi, I'm Danielle Dick. I'm the director of the Rutgers Addiction Research Center, and it is my pleasure to be talking to Petros Levounis, who is the chair of psychiatry at the New Jersey Medical School. He is also a longtime addiction expert and advocate of LGBTQ mental health, and he is currently serving as the American Psychiatric Association president. So we're really fortunate to have all of this expertise with us here at Rutgers. Thank you so much for making time to talk with us today.
Thank you, Danielle, for having me in this program.
So I would love it if you could start by talking a little bit about the path by which you ended up as chair of psychiatry and what led you into this area and to be leading these initiatives at Rutgers.
Well, my fascination with addiction psychiatry, addiction medicine came from my residency in psychiatry. I've always been very attracted to molecules, to chemistry, to organic chemistry, really small things, and also very big things like policy matters and public health. So when you put the two together, molecules and public health, that pretty much spells addiction. It is an area of psychiatry, an area of medicine that is absolutely needed, especially in 2023. And so I'm delighted that I made that decision early in my career that turned out to be just so relevant throughout the years.
You know, it's interesting to hear you say that because when I think back to how I ended up in working in addiction as well, too, I actually started out working in schizophrenia. And then when I was doing my graduate studies, I was on a project looking at alcohol use disorder. And I really did become fascinated by how addiction holds all of the complexities, right? You can study it from the molecular level, from genetics, but all the way through to, we know the environment plays a role, policy plays a role. And one of the things that I think you do really well is to span all of that. You've got basic neuroscientists in your department all the way through to, I know you do a lot of outreach surrounding this and working with the media and policymakers. Do you want to talk a little bit more about your work in that area?
Yes, absolutely. Let me just make a point about the complexity part. The complexity of addiction is real, it is there, but it has not served us very well in terms of treating our patients. What I mean by that, one of my colleagues wrote a textbook, and the first line in his textbook is, "Addiction is the most complex illness of all mankind." Like, wow, the most complex illness of mankind. That paralyzes people. We want to encourage primary care physicians. We want to encourage OBGYNs, pediatricians, psychiatrists to diagnose and treat addicted people. But if we keep on saying that this is the most complex illness of all mankind, boy, who wants to take on such a task? It's just too big. It's too much. And what we do know is that a lot of addictions have very straightforward, very simple assessments and treatments. I'm thinking about buprenorphine for opioid use disorder. I'm thinking about varenicline for tobacco use disorder. Very straightforward things. You diagnose, you treat, nothing to it. So we have to be a little careful when we keep on advertising the idea that addiction is just so complex, because it may have untoward consequences.
Absolutely. And I love that you raised that, and the fact that, there are very effective ways to treat this. Obviously, we're working on continually making it better. But like you said, there are a lot of conditions in medicine that are extremely complex, that include environmental components and biological components. And those are routinely treated in medicine. And Alexis LaPietra, who is at Barnabas, was talking about this very thing too, about how for too long, physicians have been discouraged, or who have thought treating addiction or treating psychiatry is outside of their area of expertise because they don't know enough or have the ability to treat it. But I love how you really conceptualize that actually we can and we should be treating these conditions in the way that we do treat all the other, very devastating, potentially life-threatening conditions that we treat in medicine.
Absolutely. And so going back to what we offer here at our department and our school, We do have clinical services, both inpatient and outpatient. We're fortunate that we keep on receiving funding from the state of New Jersey to support our Center of Excellence in medication for addiction treatment in northern New Jersey. This Center of Excellence does not only provide direct clinical services to our patients. We have just right here down the hall from my office. We see patients, I see patients, and we treat them for whatever addiction they may have. But the Center of Excellence goes far beyond that. We do a lot of outreach. We go into jails. We go into the community. We are partnering with faith communities to educate, not only to educate faith communities about addiction, but also to hear from the faith communities what they have learned about addiction themselves. It's a bi-directional relationship that we're developing, and we couldn't be prouder than for having these relationships with our community.
That's wonderful. And one of the things, that I've been trying to promote too in the Addiction Research Center is partnerships between researchers and our clinical service providers and working with our patients and our communities. And so are there ways that you can imagine and you would like to see the researchers integrated into the clinical services, or the potential to work with your department, or the kinds of outreach or care efforts that you're doing there?
I'm so glad you brought this up, Danielle, and you personally and your group have gone a very, very long way from the days where the researchers were only interested about data. Where are the data? Where are the clinical data? Where are the patients? How many patients do you see? How many encounters do you have? And that was the end of things. And of course, we have moved away from that kind of archaic model of partnership between research and clinical services. And now we're looking very much at long-term benefits of the clinical services when partnering with the research group. So we're delighted to see that the researchers who come and help us with our patients also offer training and offer long-term benefits for both our patients and our clinicians. And then that is really a true partnership.
I think this idea of thinking about these partnerships as bi-directional is something that is so important, and that historically, I'll put myself in this boat, your researchers were not very good at. As you mentioned, we essentially were, hey, we want to come in, we want to collect data, and now we're going to go back, we're going to analyze it, we're going to present it to other scientists, put it into academic journals. But this idea that there's actually all kinds of areas of expertise, and simply having a PhD or an MD and doing research is one way that you can have expertise. But to be a person with lived experience, our clinicians who are working day in and day out with different communities and patients, the idea that we all bring different levels of expertise and that actually we can learn from one another. I know that my involvement from working with clinical providers has made my research stronger and helped me think about new questions that, as a basic scientist, just reading about research articles and whatnot hadn't occurred to me. So I love that you're also really trying to promote that as well.
And I'll tell you one area where I think that the clinical services are ahead of research, and that is with patients who have very little motivation for treatment, to the point where they even refuse to come to see us. Way back, we used to say, I have nothing to offer to you unless you are ready for treatment. We've changed that with motivational interviewing. We can work with patients even if they have very, very little motivation or no motivation for treatment, as long as they come to our offices and they can see them. And we know that, and research has supported that. But now the clinical services have gone a step farther than that, where we can work with patients even when they refuse to see us. And the way that we do that is we bring in the families, and we teach the families motivational interviewing techniques, so they can apply these techniques over at home until the patient is motivated enough to come to our office. This has not been researched. This is something that I personally think that it has a lot of legs, and maybe in the future we're going to see something like that in the research domain as well.
I completely agree. And in fact, I do a lot of work with young adults, and I work then with a lot of parents of young adults who have these interesting sorts of parallels to how do you motivate someone that you know you care a lot about and you want the best for them, but they might not be in a place where, you know, they're ready for it. And so the idea that this, you know, motivational interviewing, which, as you say, is grounded in the addiction field and in research, but that it can be applicable to so many other areas. I actually wrote a series of blogs on Medium and put them out for parents of college students about how essentially we can use this science-based way of having conversations to help people figure out and make good choices for themselves, for their health, happiness, etc. I think it is one of the ways that you're right. It came out of clinical work, and the research has clearly suggested that this is useful, you know, in the addiction field, but I think there's far beyond that as well, too. So you are currently president of the American Psychiatric Association, which is a huge job and a great honor. And so I'd love to hear more about your work, what that entails, and really what your kind of priorities and initiatives are for this year.
The American Psychiatric Association does have enormous reach, much bigger than I ever thought before becoming a president of that organization. Like 250 full-time staff, and it is truly an organization that has not only national but also global reach. So anywhere from climate change issues to diversity, equity, and inclusion issues are very much bread and butter of what we do in at the American Psychiatric Association. We're particularly concerned about workforce issues in 2023. Before the pandemic, we used to scream from the rooftops that mental health is an important component of life. Listen to us. And after the pandemic, we find ourselves on the opposite end of that equation, where people are screaming to us, we know that mental health is important. We need services, and we need information, and we need support, and we need this, and we need that. And we don't have the woman power, the manpower to respond to that incredible demand for mental health, everything. So we are trying very hard to increase the residency slots for psychiatry. We have developed a collaborative model from the American Psychiatric Association of partnering with psychologists, with social workers, with other physicians, family physicians, OBGYNs, pediatricians, to see how we can possibly respond to that incredible demand. It's a good thing. I mean, finally, people are appreciating something that has not been as appreciated in the past. But we are not ready to respond to it. So that's a major effort that we make. The other thing that every president has their own focus or theme. So every year there's a theme. So my year has a focus on addiction, confronting addiction from prevention to recovery. And the way that we are conceptualizing this theme of addiction focus for this year is simplicity as opposed to complexity, if you like. We are not so interested in the cutting edge parts of addiction, which of course are wonderful. I'm talking about the psychedelics. I'm talking about all kinds of new things that are coming out of research, but we're particularly interested in dissemination of things that we're very confident that are tried and true. Bona fide treatments that do work, bona fide prevention strategies that we know that work. How do we implement these things that may be not as used as they should be? And the way we're going to do that, we're doing that, is in 4 campaigns, 4 mini campaigns, one every 3 months. The first one, which just got completed, was on vaping, with a major message that there are other strategies for tobacco cessation, not vaping, especially for young people. That's a particularly bad idea. The second one is on opioids. We're going through it right now. September was a recovery month, so we are looking at opioid use disorder and primarily the implementation of agonist treatments for the treatment of opioid use disorder, buprenorphine more specifically. The third part has to do with alcohol, to coincide with the holidays. Holidays are particularly risky for people who may have a problem with alcohol use. And the fourth campaign to close my presidential year is going to be on the technological addictions, an area of particular interest of mine. We just published our technological addictions book, the first one of its kind, as far as I know. And we're looking at internet gaming, cyber sex, social media, these technologies that for the most part, they are perfectly fine, and most of us use them, and we're perfectly okay with them. But a small group of people will develop a medical illness, will develop an addiction to those technologies.
Well, that sounds incredibly exciting. I love the way that you're conceptualizing, the breadth of addictions and really incorporating those. And, this may sound funny for a researcher who's focused on precision medicine and how do we improve treatments, but I completely agree and love your focus on simplicity. How do we actually get what works, disseminated into existing practices and out to individuals? Because I find, and I'm sure you must have a similar experience, that when I talk to individuals about what I do, they will frequently then, talk to me about the challenges that they've had within their family, with kids or with spouses. And one of the things that they so frequently say is, it's so hard to know where to go, to find treatment, or to know if you're getting good treatment, evidence-based treatment. And so I wondered if you could speak to that a little bit. When individuals approach you and say, gosh, where do I start with if my child, spouse, loved one is struggling? And how do I know if I'm getting the best care? What do you tell folks?
Two main ideas here. The first one is open the conversation. Start the conversation, ask the questions, engage with the loved one. Normalize the fact that this is an illness like diabetes and hypertension and anything else that we know, chronic illnesses, so that the person feels more comfortable opening up and perhaps seeking the help that they need. Follow up, stay with the person, make sure that you are there for them, be non-judgmental in the way that you engage with your loved one. This perhaps is the most important component to it. The second component is do not rush into rehabs. You won't believe how many phone calls I get. What is the best rehab in the country? And of course, there are some rehabs that are better than others. And I don't have a problem saying that some of them are particularly strong, but that's not where it's at. You need to first see a specialist. First see a specialist who's going to guide the patient and the family into this whole arc of going into perhaps a rehab if needed. And most importantly, what's going to happen after the inpatient treatment, after the rehab. The majority of people who relapse right after coming out of rehab. The whole point is to have somebody who's going to follow you before going to the rehab, during the rehab, and after. Just the whole arc of the treatment. And very often, as you very well know, addiction treatment does not require inpatient rehabilitation. It's somehow in the popular culture, in the popular imagination that if only we could get the suitcases in place and we get the loved one to go to the Betty Ford, then boom, all the problems are solved. In some ways, it is simpler than that. And in some other ways, it is a little more difficult than that.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's such important advice. It is funny how you're right. There is this mainstream idea that you go to rehab, you do your 30 days or your 90 days, and then you're cured, as opposed to knowing that it's a chronic condition. And so in the same way that you would want someone who's helping you and managing things throughout, that addiction really needs to be treated much more in that way. So thank you so much for everything that you are doing, both nationally and internationally, but also locally here in New Jersey, and for all of us at Rutgers. We're grateful to have you and for all that you're doing, and we look forward to continuing to partner in the years to come.
Thank you, Danielle. And we are so lucky to have you at Rutgers here. So I couldn't be happier that we have this partnership between researchers and clinicians.